Hey everyone, my name's Adrian Neibauer. Welcome to my classroom. I've been a teacher for almost 20 years. I think this is my 19th year. And I've done most of my teaching in fifth grade. This is my fifth grade classroom, but I've taught all the grade levels, kindergarten through fifth grade. And I just wanted to, before I get started, just say thank you for spending some time with me, wherever you are, whatever time it is. Thanks for being here with me. I wanted to tell you a story a little bit, kind of share my story with you. Um, I don't always remember wanting to be a teacher, but I do remember feeling this desire to avoid difficult things in school. So I remember fifth grade is one of my favorite grades. In fact, I think it is the best grade level in elementary school. But I remember being a fifth grader and I was a new kid. So I had moved districts and I started a new grade level, fifth grade at my elementary school. Now, I would argue that being a new kid is just hard in general, but being a new kid in fifth grade is especially challenging because most of the kids have known each other for a number of years, 4 or 5 years. And so then when you come in, not only do you not know each other, but they know each other really, really well. They formed little cliques and groups and friendships over those years. So I remember being in fifth grade, and I remember not really enjoying that school year. I remember it being a difficult year. I'm trying to think, I remember not really enjoying reading. I don't really remember my teacher very much. I remember we were in a mobile classroom. I remember falling in love with Laura Ingalls Wilder and the Little House on the Prairie book series, Big House in the Little Woods and Little House on the Prairie. I remember reading those books and really loving those during silent reading time. But I don't remember particularly enjoying fifth grade. But there was one moment or experience that I remember very vividly. So my teacher had us do this project. She called it an iSearch project. I don't know if you remember those, but basically it was an independent research project. I could talk about or learn about whatever I wanted. And I remember really, really struggling with this project because I had no idea what I wanted to do. I don't remember too many of the parameters of the project. I probably had to make something. I'm sure I had to maybe write like a paragraph or a paper of some kind, maybe make a poster. But I remember that one of the requirements was that I had to interview an expert in the field. And I remember this really caused me a lot of anxiety. I was super nervous about this because I didn't know what topic I wanted, but I also didn't know like where would I find an expert. So I remember really struggling with finding a topic. I played around with the idea of like holograms, like in the early 90s. 3D was really, I thought that was super cool, and I thought maybe I could do some research on like holographic technology, but pretty quickly realized that was like way over my head, too complicated, and where was I gonna find an expert in holograms? So I remember really, really struggling. When I was in fifth grade, 10 years old, I remember watching a lot of football with my dad. Denver Broncos, Sunday football, kind of a big deal in our house. And so I remember struggling with this project. Now I don't know if like my dad, I'm sure my dad influenced me. I wasn't like super passionate about football, but I ended up landing on the topic of football. And so I was gonna do my iSearch on football. I'm sure my dad had something to say about that. I'm sure he influenced me to do my research project, my iSearch on football. So the next question was, okay, so I have to learn about football, do some research on football. And, we were big Denver Bronco fans, still a Denver Bronco fan. And I remember thinking, well, how am I gonna, like, what does an expert in football look like? And my dad, this is what I remember. I remember my dad saying, well, let's just go and talk to a football player, a Denver Bronco. And I remember being like super embarrassed, like, no, that's not gonna happen, like that, no. And he's like, get some paper, pencil, and hop in the car. We'll drive down to the training facility where they practice. They call it the Bronco bubble, the bubble, okay? And I was like terrified. I was like, oh my gosh, Dad, this isn't gonna work. I mean, what if they get mad at us? What if they kick us out? And he just dismissed me and was like, no, we'll just see. We'll just see. So I don't remember too much, but I remember like walking in and being like totally overwhelmed. There was a secretary sitting there, and I remember having this like feeling in my stomach, like, oh my gosh, this is not gonna work. I don't really know what I thought was gonna happen, but I was worried that something bad was gonna happen. Now my dad is a very charming businessman, so I'm sure that he approached the secretary and explained that his son is passionate about football. His son loves football, wants to become a professional football player, and is doing a project on football. Okay, most of that sentence wasn't true, just the part about doing a project on football. And would it be possible for him to talk to any of the players? Is anybody lingering around? So she made a phone call, and sure enough, she's like, well, actually, there are a few people back there. They said send them back. So I remember walking with my dad up to a point, and then he kind of just kicked me into the locker room. He's like, just go. Now, I'm sure he was there, but once I walked into that Bronco locker room, I was like, my vision just went, whoop, and I was super overwhelmed. And I was just like, I cannot believe I am in the Denver Bronco like a professional locker room. I'm looking, there's like numbers, like John Elway's locker was there, and like jerseys and pads and equipment. I was blown away. So as I'm admiring all of this stuff, guy comes up to me, introduces himself. His name is Steve Atwater. Okay, and so he had me take a bench. I knew who he was. I was very nervous. I don't remember. He's like, have a seat, and we had a conversation. I can't tell you what I asked him. I am sure I wrote some stuff down, but I was having like a conversation with Steve Atwater. I was literally talking to a professional Bronco. And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw this huge guy approach. It turned out to be Carl Mecklenburg, big guy. He comes and sits down, and we start having this conversation. Two football players and this 10-year-old kid are talking, and I imagine it's about football. They're asking me questions. I'm sure I wrote something down, but I was probably shaking too much to write anything down. I don't know how long it lasted, probably maybe 5-10 minutes. It was probably super quick, and I remember leaving feeling dizzy, and then I'll be honest, I don't remember much of the rest of the project. I'm sure I made a poster. I'm sure I wrote something about the fact that I interviewed the two of the Denver Broncos at the time. I vaguely remember maybe like a red question mark on my paper, like, did you really interview the Broncos, or, kind of a thing. But here's what I remember, okay? I remember the experience. I remember being blown away that something that I was doing in school, I could take into the real world in my personal life, and I could do something with it. Now, I would love to say that inspired me to become a teacher, but that's not. I just kind of filed that experience away. You go after 5th grade is middle school. We joke around, it's like, the dark years. Middle school's tough, so you go through middle school, go through high school, and I realized probably about my senior year, senior, that I wanted to become a teacher. It was either a teacher, a professional camp counselor, or maybe a professional clown. That's another story. But I decided to become a teacher. And as I was going through my teacher prep program, as I was going through college, I believe that I had this subconscious drive to be thinking about the experience for my students. I'm not going to presume to say that I knew I had it all figured out when I was 20. But once I became a teacher through my student teaching, and then in these last 19 years of being a teacher, what I was subconscious before, this desire to create an experience for students that they would remember, is very much a part of who I am as a teacher today for my kiddos, right? So I believe that the learning experience is greater than any lesson plan that you can deliver, no matter how exciting the lesson is, right? However you dress it up with, activities or games or crafts, it's the experience, right? And I truly believe, like I remember when I was a student teacher, I wanted my students, I was doing a unit on poetry. I was in a kindergarten classroom. And I remember wanting my students to feel like they were real poets. I remember doing a project that turned into an after-school club when I taught 4th grade. And I was working with boys who were struggling to be good writers. And I remember creating a club, an after-school club, where I wanted it to be a mix of like the Dead Poets Society and Harry Potter, because that was big at the time. Like I wanted them to, because I knew I was going to push them to do things that were really, really hard. So I wanted them to feel like they were a part of a secret club, a secret writing society just for boys, okay? When you get kids to do something difficult, the way that you do that is through their heart, is through their experience. Yes, teaching is about, teaching them content and teaching them information, but we don't deliver, like, you don't deliver content, okay? Pizzas get delivered. You need to teach students through the experience. You want to teach them through how they feel. You need to create experiences for them they're going to remember. So I call myself a designer of learning experiences. I'm a teacher, proud public educator, but I consider myself a designer of experiences. And I look at my students, I look at them as my users. How do I want them to engage with what I'm doing, whatever the content is? And knowing that every lesson, every topic, every unit is not going to be super exciting. It's not going to lend itself to the most amazing experience. Sometimes kids just need to learn the multiplication timetables. Sometimes you just got to learn long division. But when you're up front with your kids and say, okay, well, for this particular project or unit, you need to just get good at your divisibility rules or your multiplication strategies or long division and practice, 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 practice. But when you're up front with them, then they recognize that you're trying to be honest with them and know that not every lesson is going to be like this. There's going to be some learning experiences that are super memorable. So, I've been teaching for 19 years now, and what was maybe a subconscious seed that was planted when I was 10 is now something that drives everything I do as an educator, as a learning experience designer. I believe that I want to design learning experiences that kids remember for the rest of their lives. So I asked myself a couple questions, and I want you to think about these questions for your next lesson, whether that's tomorrow or next week or next semester. Maybe it's a unit that you have coming up. I think about, obviously, what do I want my kids to know, okay? But then the next big question is, how do I want them to feel? What do I want them to feel? How do I want them to feel? Do I want them to feel excited? Do I want them to feel confused? And then I ask, where can I put rigor in? Because you're going to get pushback from all areas. People are going to say, you know what, you're not being as rigorous unless you follow the curriculum guide. And that's not true. So be prepared to have some pushback, but especially in this pandemic when things are so damn stressful and it's hard to form connections with kids when we're masked and social distance from each other. I double down on the student relationships, on building those student relationships and we can, that's another story about what you value in terms of a successful lesson or unit or day in your classroom. But especially during this pandemic, I ask myself, yes, what do I want kids to know, but how do I want them to feel? What do I want them to feel? And then I ask myself, where can I put in things that are rigorous? Okay, where can I crank up that rigor a little bit? And then one of my favorite questions is, what do I want them to remember? And that's different than what I want them to know. Like, what I want them to know is very much about the content, but what I want them to remember, it goes through the heart. It's this experience. What do I want them to remember next year, in 5 years, in 10 years? What do I want them to remember as an adult when they're thinking back to their 5th grade year, okay? They're not gonna remember every lesson you do. They're not gonna remember, the lessons that failed or the projects that were a disaster. They're gonna remember the experience. And that's why it's so important to focus on the experience. So here I am, almost 20 years as an educator, and I want to leave you with just those things to think about. So whether that's your next lesson or next unit, you're planning your next semester, just take one area. Maybe it's a math concept, or maybe it's a science concept, or maybe it's a writing strategy. I want you to think about, how do you want your kids to feel? What do you want the experience to be like? How do you want to design that experience? And just start there, okay? Put the curriculum map down, okay? Put the textbooks away. They'll still be there when you need them, if you need them. And how do you want your students to feel? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to remember? Where can you crank up that rigor just a little bit? And I promise you that it's gonna be, if you focus with the experience, the learning experience, it's gonna trump lesson plans every single time. Thanks for listening to my story.